It'll probably start in sometime in January and continue all the way through 2010 and all the way into the early parts of 2011, maybe into the summer of 2011. So it's a long haul and some considerable suffering. Which is
Are we going to be under lockdown, kind of martial law?
Well, let's be real clear about that. Martial law and lockdown are not the same. Martial law is simply a declaration that the civilian courts no longer have authority over criminal offenses. And it is a tool that is used by the military in oppression and in repression, and it is used by political authorities through the military to suppress civil action. So they may declare martial law, but it's not necessary to do occupation. So if you're sitting around waiting for the declaration of martial law to decide, okay, now I'm in for the revolution, it'll probably all be over by the time the government actually does anything official. It's kind of like the Riot Act. People don't understand the words and the history that we live in, but they used to have to. The British, before they could, in the previous revolution, before they could come on in and bust heads, and even later on, our guys, they'd have to come on in and read a declaration. And in the case of the U.S., in the early history, they would read a Riot Act, which was an act saying, basically, I'm a military authority or a civilian authority, and you all guys are rioting, and I'm reading this legal bit of paper, and then I'm going to let these guys come and bust your head. So I doubt they'll go that way. They're a lot sneakier these days. So the oppression and the suppression is already on us. Look at how heavily the media is saying, get your vaccine, get your vaccine, get your vaccine, all of this kind of stuff. And yet, and at the same time, we're also getting all of the fear the flu, fear this, fear that, and so on. So it's a very insidious kind of a process. If you really want to know the ins and outs of the control mechanisms, I would advise everybody to go and listen to Michael Tessarian in his Architects of Control series. There's a guy who has spent years laying it out down to the hairs on the gnat's ass, whereas I'm a big picture kind of a guy, so I can speak to broader trends. But if you want details, go and listen to Michael Tessarian.
Okay. Well, aren't we under some kind of de facto martial law with this declaration of a swine flu pandemic?
Basically, that's correct at the moment, because the declaration is actually twofold or threefold. It has three particular purposes. It puts us under WHO, so should they decide that they want to, they could let WHO take over, World Health Organization. And the other one is that the declaration has many economic components to it. And in a third sense, it allows them to exercise the what we can think of as community hygiene laws, where they can, force quarantine, et cetera, without raising too much of a hassle. They can wave a sheet of paper saying, hey, it's official, knuckle down and let me quarantine you, that kind of a deal. So in a sense, it's already here.
Exactly. I mean, to me, it's unquestionable. And let me try to see if there's a link here in your data set between this declaration by President Obama this weekend and what's coming up with this Copenhagen conference in December, where world governments prominently mentioned in their literature. Do you think one has anything to do with the other from what you see?
Sure. Actually, one is but a tool or a precursor. They're not going to get to a world government by coming on in and making a big declaration about it. They're going to do it in little tiny bits and pieces. Death by 1,000 cuts is the mechanism, or, boil the frog slowly kind of a deal. And so since we're all sitting around as frogs in this big pot of water, they've just turned the heat up a little bit. The issue is that, but at a larger sense, in a much larger sense, if you stand way back, the powers that be are faced with loss of control on a number of different levels.
Before we go there, Cliff, I'm going to have to hold that because right up against the break, and it sounds like a big point coming up. So let's hold it right there and come back to the powers that be and what they're trying to hold on to. And we'll be back with Cliff from the Webbot and Annie DeRiso after a word from our sponsors. Back, 1-800-313-9443 is the number to call. And if I could, just a quick program note to my producer, if we could get a refresh on our caller screen, that would be really great. Our special guest tonight is Cliff. Also joining me is our under-the-radar news correspondent, Annie DeRiso. And Cliff, as we went into the break, you were talking about how the powers that be, again, are trying to hang on to that power.
Facing kind of a weird sort of an issue. You brought up the Copenhagen issue, the treaty that's coming up. This is not anything that's spur of the moment. This is part of a plan that's been laid out probably 30, 40 years, and step by step by step, they've had to continue along with it, and they reached a certain point in 2001, they accelerated it, but now they're facing conditions where they're actually running up against this wall of individuals that know that basically this is all bogus and leading towards a tighter control on the planet by a few number of people. and they're losing various elements of their control just at the same time that a lot of these plans were supposed to come to fruition, but they dare not abandon them. They've got to still proceed. So, but they're losing strength to actually get a lot of these things accomplished. Sort of makes sense there.
Is this why we're being attacked on so many different fronts simultaneously, because they're in a rush, because of their sense that they're losing control?
There's that, and then there's the larger issues of their fears of bigger issues than just the populace as a whole. Plus, there's it's also a tool. The more you are bombarded with disparate different kinds of fear language from different sources, the more you're kept in a state of fractured trauma. And you're less likely to make intelligent decisions. You can't really get your thoughts together. They're actually trying to induce a particular kind of social malaise that is a result of continued trauma, as in post-traumatic stress syndrome managed on a mass scale.
Which is why we're seeing this huge injection of fear-based media coverage.
Correct. And you think about it, you go and you read, what's his name, Sun Tzu, The Art of War. All war is based on deception, and so the first thing you want to do is to start confusing your enemy with various different kinds of fractured feints and fronts, and just keep them running around, and they exhaust all their energy and fall in a pile, and then you walk in and you're in control. And fundamentally, that's what they've been doing for decades, and now they thought they had it all nicely steamrolled, but the problem was the Internet kind of turned, probably because the universe wants it that way, turned to be their undoing. It was supposed to be this particular kind of control mechanism where they would have basically a one-to-one correspondence with everybody in the world, where they could do one casting, not broadcasting, but actually very specialized media as you're giving out now. Only they never envisioned what people would really do with it. And they can't really clamp down without cutting off their own cash cow, and then we'll have all these other issues. So they've actually fundamentally lost a level of control over a huge amount of the populace, something they'd never anticipated. I was one of the cube farmed. I mean, I'm only a recent freed prisoner, so to speak. So I was a farmed animal for years and went along with it all, a Federalist and all this kind of stuff. And basically it's kind of like, geez, software engineer, I was having a good time living in my own world with the digital things, and if I can be broken loose, almost anybody can.
Well, the same with me. I spent most of my life right in the mainstream, and wasn't until the state of Arizona and their minion politicians tried to steal my land without compensation, and that of about 1,200 of my neighbors, where they basically just tried to force us off our land because they wanted it for other purposes, and they didn't want to pay for it. And they discovered the North American Union from that, and the Canamex Highway, and the New World Order, and the rest, as they say, is history. But let me ask you a question here, because we have really kind of, I think, bumped up against something very big. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Is this Copenhagen conference, is your data set suggest anything about how big this could possibly be?
Yeah, this is actually it's curious that it's coming up in this timing, because I was not aware of it at the time that I wrote in the reports about the international running around of the Obama administration in fall and the chaos and so forth. So this will be quite large. In terms of the emotional impact, no, it's not going to be on 9/11, but it's halfway between that and probably the ports of Dubai in terms of its emotional impact on all of us. It also may bring, it has really weird words, and I did a sampling of some of the data we've got running now. I just went through and randomly dumped some tables out and had a quick look. But around the Copenhagen Treaty, in conjunction with the US of A, is the word humiliation at the highest level of archetype. So maybe they won't be able to pull it off. Maybe it means that we'll all be humiliated because they will pull it off. Who knows? But nonetheless, humiliation is the highest level archetype associated with that at the moment.
When do you expect your next run to be out, Cliff?
Well, I'm going to have a couple of more interviews through next week, and then on the 4th of November, I go into the tunnel of doing the work, and I hope to have it out early in December, before the 15th.
And how will people be able to subscribe and get that?
They'll just be able to purchase it off of halfpasthuman.com. We don't do subscriptions anymore because I don't want to have a karmic debt of owing people a report if the Internet goes down, and I suspect that will be the case.
Are you aware of a meeting that took place at Fort Huachuca here in Arizona between Homeland officials, FEMA officials, and the security officials that could actually bring down the internet. Are you aware of anything like that?
No. I'm aware of very little, though. If I'm not doing the data, I don't follow media or any of that kind of stuff.
Okay,
so if it occurred, it would be news to me.
Well, it was news to me, too, until I had two different sources unrelated to each other tell me that that meeting did indeed take place. In fact, Annie and I actually talked about that possibility happening a week ahead of time. But I do think the net will be brought down here. If we get into January and February and all hell breaks loose as you're forecasting, I do think the net will be one of the first casualties. Stay tuned, everybody. More with Clif and my special friend and fellow host, Annie DeRiso, after a word from these sponsors. Welcome back to the Common Sense Show. Our special guest tonight is Clif from the Webbot Report, and also joining me is Annie. Hi, Annie. How are you? Annie?
Did we lose her?
I think she's had technical difficulties on and off, and it's not like her to be quite this quiet, especially since you brought up the space aliens